Hi, I'm Natalie Harper. 3 months ago, I walked into a courtroom holding a manila folder that would destroy the man I thought I loved. My husband Trevor stood across from me with his lawyer, his perfectly pressed suit, and a stack of fake fertility reports claiming I was the reason we couldn't have children. He looked confident. He looked righteous. He had no idea what was inside my folder. Medical records from Cedar Hills Medical Center dated 6 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Records showing he'd gotten a vasectomy 3 months before our wedding. Records proving he'd spent 2.5 years watching me cry, blame myself, and believe my body was broken while he knew the entire time it was a lie. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is what he did with the money, the fake clinic appointments, and the support groups he made me join so I could share my shame with strangers. So what do you think happened when the judge opened that folder? I should have known something was wrong the night of our 4th anniversary. Trevor had chosen the Monarch Restaurant, this upscale place right on the Willamette River where the chandeliers cost more than my car and every table had a view that made you forget you were still in Portland. He'd been acting strange all week, more attentive than usual, bringing home flowers for no reason, texting me during his site visits to ask how my day was going. At the time, I thought he was being romantic. Looking back, I realize he was setting the stage. We were seated at a corner table with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. The sunset painted everything gold and orange, the kind of lighting that makes you believe in second chances and fresh starts. I wore the emerald dress he'd bought me for my birthday, the one that made me feel elegant even though I'd gained weight from the hormone treatments. Or what I thought were hormone treatments. Trevor ordered wine, expensive wine, the kind he usually saved for closing deals on his development projects. He smiled at me across the table, reached for my hand, and said something about how lucky he was. I remember thinking in that moment that maybe things would finally get better. Maybe the fertility struggles were behind us. Maybe we'd find another path forward. I'd spent the morning crying in my design studio after another negative pregnancy test, another month of failure, another reminder that my body refused to cooperate. But sitting there with his hand warm around mine and the river sparkling below us, I let myself hope. That hope lasted exactly 12 minutes. A woman approached our table, mid-50s, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a burgundy blazer that screamed money and authority. She stopped right beside Trevor, and her face went through about 5 emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise, confusion, something close to anger, then a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Trevor Donovan," she said, and her voice had this edge to it like she was testing whether he'd pretend not to know her. "I haven't seen you since the consultation. How are you feeling? Are you having any complications from the procedure?" I watched Trevor's face drain of color. His hand went slack in mine. The woman kept talking, something about follow-up appointments and making sure everything healed properly, and I just sat there trying to make sense of words that didn't fit together. Procedure. Complications. Consultation. She was looking at him like a doctor looks at a patient, concerned and slightly disapproving that he hadn't scheduled his checkup. Then she noticed me, really noticed me for the first time, and her expression shifted to confusion. "Oh," she said, glancing between us. "I didn't realize you were married. I assumed when you came in for the vasectomy that you were, well, I shouldn't make assumptions." She laughed awkwardly. "Anyway, make sure you schedule that follow-up, Trevor. It's important." She walked away. Just walked away like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of our anniversary dinner. The restaurant noise continued around us. Silverware on plates, murmured conversations, someone laughing at the bar. Everything normal except the complete destruction of my entire world happening at table 17. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened but nothing came out. Trevor was staring at his wine glass like it held answers, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite swallow. Finally, he looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not guilt. Not remorse. Calculation. He was figuring out his next move, weighing his options, deciding how to spin this. "Natalie," he started, his voice so calm it made my skin crawl. That was a misunderstanding. She has me confused with someone else. You know how doctors are, they see hundreds of patients and sometimes they mix people up. The waiter appeared to take our order. I couldn't even look at him. Trevor ordered for both of us like nothing was wrong, like the last 2 minutes hadn't happened, like his voice wasn't shaking just slightly on the word salmon. When the waiter left, Trevor reached for my hand again but I pulled it back. 2.5 years, I said quietly. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. 2.5 years we've been trying. 2.5 years of tracking ovulation and timing intercourse and crying every single month when my period came. 2.5 years of appointments and tests and medications that made me sick and hormonal and desperate. You sat across from me at dinner tables just like this one and listened to me blame myself. You held me while I cried and told me it wasn't my fault when you absolutely knew it was never going to happen. His face hardened. You're overreacting, he said. That woman doesn't know what she's talking about. I would never do something like that to you. To us. Think about it rationally, Natalie. Why would I go through all of this if I'd had a vasectomy? That question hung in the air between us. Why would he? And that's when my brain started working again, started connecting pieces I'd been too trusting or too desperate to connect before. The fertility clinic visits where he always went alone to give his samples. The doctor appointments where he sat beside me nodding sympathetically while they explained that sometimes male factor infertility doesn't show up on standard tests. The way he'd steered me toward more and more invasive procedures, more hormones, more interventions on my body while his remained mysteriously untested beyond those initial screenings that he handled privately. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor loud enough that nearby tables glanced over. Trevor's eyes went wide with something close to panic. Sit down, he hissed. You're making a scene. I grabbed my purse. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I need to go, I managed to say. I need to not be here right now. He stood too, catching my wrist. His grip was firm, not quite painful but definitely not gentle. We're not done talking about this, he said quietly. You're going to walk out over some random woman's confusion? After 4 years of marriage? After everything we've built together? I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then up at his face. In that moment, I saw him clearly for maybe the first time in 6 years. Saw the control, the manipulation, the careful construction of a reality that served him. My interior design business that he'd encouraged me to keep small so I'd have more time to focus on getting pregnant. Our joint bank account that he managed because he was better with money. The Pearl District apartment that was in his name alone because his credit score was higher. The fertility journey that had isolated me from friends and family because I was too embarrassed to keep explaining why it wasn't working. He'd built a cage so carefully, so lovingly, that I'd helped him paint the bars. I pulled my wrist free. The emerald dress suddenly felt wrong, too tight, like it belonged to someone else. I walked out of that restaurant and didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear Trevor calling my name, first quiet and controlled, then louder, then finally with an edge of genuine distress. I didn't care. I made it to my car, got inside, locked the doors, and just sat there in the parking lot while the sky finished turning dark. My phone started buzzing immediately. Text after text from Trevor. Baby, please come back. We need to talk about this like adults. You're upset and not thinking clearly. That woman was obviously confused. Don't throw away our marriage over a stranger's mistake. Each message made my stomach turn. Then came the voicemails. His voice shifting from concerned to frustrated to angry to something that sounded almost like pleading. But underneath it all was that same calculation I'd seen at the table. He wasn't sorry. He was managing a situation. I drove home on autopilot, my hands locked on the steering wheel, my mind racing through every moment of the last 2.5 years. Every negative test I'd taken alone in our bathroom, tears streaming down my face while I wrapped the stick in toilet paper so he wouldn't have to see it. Every appointment where doctors poked and prodded me, took my blood, did ultrasounds, prescribed medications that made me bloated and emotional. Every support group meeting where I sat in a circle with other women and shared my story of inexplicable infertility while they nodded with understanding. He'd watched all of it. Participated in all of it. Held me through all of it. Knowing. The apartment felt different when I walked in. Same furniture I'd carefully selected, same color scheme I'd designed, same artwork on the walls. But it looked staged now, like a showroom instead of a home. I went straight to our bedroom, to Trevor's side of the closet, and started searching. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe. Confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that the woman at the restaurant had been right. I found it in his gym bag, shoved in the side pocket under a sweaty shirt and protein bar wrappers. A medical bill from Cedar Hills Medical Center dated 6 years and 3 months ago. The charge was for a consultation and surgical procedure, and the description said vasectomy, bilateral. The amount due was $0. Insurance had covered everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stood there holding this piece of paper, this absolute proof of his betrayal, and something inside me went very quiet and very cold. 6 years and 3 months ago was exactly 3 months before our wedding. Before I walked down the aisle in a dress I'd saved for 2 years to afford. Before I promised him forever in front of everyone we knew. Before we'd even had a single conversation about trying for children. He'd gotten a vasectomy knowing I wanted kids someday. Knowing we'd talked about having a family. Knowing that starting a family was one of the reasons I'd said yes when he proposed on that beach in Cannon Beach with the sunset making everything look like a fairy tale. My phone rang. Trevor's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. It rang again. And again. On the 4th call, I finally picked up. Where are you? His voice was tight, controlled anger barely masked by concern. Are you home? I'm on my way. We need to discuss this face to face. I'm looking at a medical bill, I said flatly. Cedar Hills Medical Center. 6 years ago. 3 months before our wedding. Vasectomy, bilateral. Silence on the other end. Long, stretching silence where I could almost hear him recalculating, restructuring his approach. Then his voice came back different, harder. You went through my personal belongings. That's a violation of privacy, Natalie. We're supposed to trust each other. I almost laughed. The sound that came out was bitter and sharp. Trust, I repeated. You want to talk about trust? You've been lying to me for 6 years. You married me knowing you'd made sure we could never have the children I wanted. You watched me go through hell trying to get pregnant when you knew it was impossible. And you're upset about privacy? It's more complicated than that, he said. You don't understand the full situation. When I get home, we'll sit down and I'll explain everything. There are reasons, Natalie. Good reasons that you haven't considered. Just wait for me. Don't do anything rash. The condescension in his voice, the implication that I was being emotional and irrational, that I needed him to explain reality to me like I was a child, that finally broke through the shock. I felt anger rising, hot and clarifying. Don't come home tonight, I said. Go to your mother's house. Go to Kyle's. I don't care. But don't come here. That's my apartment, he snapped, the mask slipping. My name on the lease. My furniture. You can't kick me out of my own place. Then I'll leave, I said. And I hung up. I grabbed an overnight bag and started throwing clothes into it. Toiletries from the bathroom. My laptop. The external hard drive with all my design files. I was moving on muscle memory, not really thinking, just knowing I needed to not be there when he arrived. As I zipped the bag closed, my eyes caught on the framed photo on the dresser. Our wedding day. Me in white, him in a gray suit, both of us smiling like we'd won the lottery. That photo had been taken exactly 3 months after he'd permanently ensured we'd never have the life I thought we were building. I grabbed my bag and walked out. Locked the door behind me even though it was pointless, even though it was his apartment and he had keys. The gesture felt important anyway. In my car, I sat for a moment trying to figure out where to go. My parents lived 3 hours away in Eugene. My closest friend Vanessa had a one-bedroom apartment with barely enough room for herself. The thought of explaining this to anyone, of saying the words out loud, made my throat close up. I ended up at a hotel near the airport, one of those generic chains with beige walls and art that matches nothing. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and other people's lives. I sat on the edge of the bed with the medical bill spread out in front of me and just stared at it. The date. The procedure description. The doctor's name, Dr. Patricia Nguyen. This small piece of paper that proved my entire marriage was built on a lie. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Trevor had moved from calling to texting in rapid-fire succession. Each message more desperate than the last. You're making a huge mistake. I love you. We can work through this. Please just talk to me. You're not thinking straight. That bill doesn't mean what you think it means. I had it done because of a medical condition. I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right time. Please, Natalie. Please. I turned my phone face down and closed my eyes. The room was too quiet. Too empty. In the silence, my mind started working through everything I'd accepted as truth. The fertility clinic he'd chosen, the one that was oddly expensive and required all payments up front. The way he'd always handled the financial side of our attempts to conceive, insisting I shouldn't stress about costs when we had good insurance. The support group he'd found for me, full of women struggling with infertility, where I'd shared my most intimate fears and failures. The supplements he'd bought me, the diet changes he'd suggested, the yoga classes for stress reduction. All of it designed to make me believe the problem was me. And the money. Oh God, the money. I grabbed my laptop and logged into our joint checking account, the one I rarely looked at because Trevor handled the finances. I started scrolling through months of transactions. Charges to the Cascade Fertility Center, sometimes 3 or 4 a month. Hundreds of dollars each time. Sometimes over 1,000. I added it up roughly in my head and felt sick. Over the past 2.5 years, more than $60,000 had gone to that clinic. $60,000 for treatments that couldn't possibly work because the man providing half the genetic material had made sure his half wasn't viable. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the Cascade Fertility Center website. Professional photos of smiling doctors, testimonials from happy families, a clean modern building in the photos. I called the main number, not even caring that it was nearly 10 at night. The answering service picked up, a tired-sounding woman who told me the office would be open at 8 tomorrow morning. I need to speak to someone about billing records, I said. For treatments my husband and I received. Can I get records of what procedures were actually performed? You'll need to come in during business hours with proper identification, she said in a bored voice. We can't discuss patient information over the phone. Is this an emergency? No, I said. Not an emergency. Just the end of everything. I spent that night curled up in the hotel bed with my laptop, searching for information about vasectomies, about reversal procedures, about legal options when your spouse lies about fertility. The internet had endless forums of women who discovered their partners had secretly had vasectomies, men who'd deceived their wives for years. Reading their stories felt like looking into a mirror. The gaslighting. The blame shifting. The way their husbands had encouraged them to see specialists, take medications, undergo procedures, all while knowing it was pointless. One thread in particular caught my attention. A woman describing how her husband had not only lied about his vasectomy but had also faked fertility test results to make her think the problem was unexplained infertility on both sides. She'd found out after hiring a private investigator for an unrelated issue. The investigator had uncovered the medical records, and she'd taken them to court during the divorce. The comments below were full of support and also recommendations for lawyers who specialized in cases involving reproductive coercion and fraud. Reproductive coercion. I'd never heard that term before. I Googled it. The intentional interference with a partner's reproductive choices. Lying about birth control. Sabotaging contraception. Lying about fertility status. It was considered a form of domestic abuse in many states, Oregon included. I sat there in that hotel room as the sky started turning gray with early morning light, and I made a decision. This wasn't just a betrayal I had to accept and move past. This wasn't something couples counseling could fix. Trevor had spent 6 years systematically lying to me, manipulating me, watching me suffer and blame myself for something he'd deliberately caused. He'd spent tens of thousands of dollars on fake treatments. He'd isolated me emotionally by making me believe I was defective. And he'd done it all with such careful planning, such deliberate cruelty, that there had to be consequences beyond just divorce. At 8 in the morning, I called Vanessa. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. Natalie? What's wrong? Are you okay? I need the name of that lawyer you used when your ex tried to hide assets during your divorce, I said. The really good one who found everything. There was a pause. Then her voice came back sharp and awake. What did Trevor do? Everything, I said. He did everything. Can you text me her number? The lawyer's name was Lauren Blackwell, and her office was downtown in one of those old buildings that had been renovated to look modern while keeping the original character. I showed up at 9 without an appointment, still wearing yesterday's emerald dress, holding my overnight bag and the medical bill like they were life preservers. The receptionist took one look at me and picked up the phone. Ms. Blackwell, she said quietly, I think you should see this. She's a walk-in, but I think you should see her. Lauren Blackwell was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that assessed me in about 3 seconds. She ushered me into her office, a space with windows overlooking the Willamette and furniture that probably cost more than my car. Tell me what happened, she said, and her voice had this quality that made you feel like whatever you were about to say, she'd already heard worse. So I told her. Started with the anniversary dinner and worked backward through 2.5 years of fertility treatments and forward through the night at the hotel and the billing records I discovered. I gave her the medical bill from Cedar Hills. I showed her the bank statements with all the charges to Cascade Fertility Center. I explained about the support groups, the medications, the procedures I'd undergone while Trevor watched. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and tapped her pen against the pad a few times. This is one of the most calculated cases of reproductive coercion and fraud I've seen, she said finally. And I've seen quite a few. The financial aspect alone is significant. If you can prove those fertility center charges were for services that couldn't possibly work or weren't even performed, that's fraud. Add in the emotional abuse, the lying about his vasectomy status, the deliberate manipulation over 6 years, and you have a substantial case. For what? I asked. Divorce? For divorce, yes. But also potentially for damages. Civil fraud. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. In Oregon, reproductive coercion can be grounds for restraining orders and can significantly impact property division and spousal support. She leaned forward. Natalie, I need to ask you something important. Do you want to pursue this quietly, settle out of court, move on with your life? Or do you want to make him answer for what he did? I thought about the woman at the restaurant, Dr. Nguyen, mentioning the follow-up appointment like it was routine. I thought about Trevor's face across the anniversary dinner table, calculating how to spin the lie. I thought about $60,000 charged to treatments that were never real. I thought about 2.5 years of crying and blaming myself while he watched. I want him to answer for it, I said. All of it. Lauren smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed her job. Then we have work to do, she said. First thing we need are those medical records from Cedar Hills confirming the vasectomy. Then we need to prove what actually happened at this Cascade Fertility Center. I have a private investigator I work with, Marcus Reed. He's excellent at getting information people don't want found. Are you comfortable with that? Whatever it takes, I said. She nodded. I'm going to need a retainer to get started. $5,000 to begin. Given the financial situation with your joint accounts, do you have access to funds he doesn't control? I had a separate savings account from before we got married, one I'd kept meaning to close but never had. About $8,000 that Trevor didn't know existed because I'd opened it when I was 22 and terrified of being dependent on anyone. That fear had saved me. I can get you the retainer today, I said. Good, Lauren said. Now, I need to prepare you for something. When we start pulling these records, when we file for divorce and include allegations of fraud and reproductive coercion, Trevor is going to fight back. Men like him, men who've maintained this level of control and deception for this long, they don't just accept consequences. He'll try to discredit you. He'll probably claim you're being vindictive, that you're mentally unstable, that you're making things up. He might even file counterclaims. You need to be ready for that. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. For the first time in 6 years, I felt like I could see clearly. The fog of manipulation and gaslighting and self-blame had lifted, and underneath it was just cold, burning clarity. Lauren stood and extended her hand. Then let's get to work. Over the next 3 days, I moved through my life like I was watching someone else live it. I went back to the apartment while Trevor was at work and packed everything that mattered to me. My design portfolio, the few pieces of furniture I'd owned before the marriage, clothes, books, the set of kitchen knives my grandmother had given me. I left behind anything we'd bought together, anything that felt contaminated by his lies. The movers I hired worked quickly and efficiently, and by the time Trevor came home that evening, half the apartment was empty and I was gone. He called 73 times that day. I know because I counted. Each voicemail grew progressively more unhinged. The first few were attempts at reconciliation, his voice smooth and reasonable, explaining that we needed to have a mature conversation about our misunderstanding. By call 20, the mask had slipped. He was angry, demanding I return his calls, insisting I was being childish and dramatic. By call 50, there was something close to panic in his voice. He'd realized I wasn't coming back. That I'd actually left. By call 73, recorded at 2 a.m, he was crying. Actual tears I could hear through the phone as he begged me to just talk to him, to give him a chance to make me understand. I saved every single voicemail. Lauren had told me to document everything, so I did. I screenshotted every text message. I kept the medical bill in a protective sleeve. I wrote down everything I could remember about the fertility journey, every appointment, every medication, every procedure, every conversation with doctors. My hands cramped from writing, but I kept going, filling notebook pages with dates and details and the slow realization of how deep the deception ran. Vanessa let me stay in her spare room, which was really just a converted storage space with a futon and boxes of her winter clothes. I didn't care. It was clean and safe and Trevor didn't know about it. She'd wake me up at odd hours when she heard me crying in my sleep, sit on the edge of the futon, and just hold my hand until I could breathe again. She never said I told you so, even though she'd never particularly liked Trevor, had always found him too controlling, too quick to speak for me in groups, too invested in keeping me small. She'd been right about all of it and she never once made me feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. Lauren moved fast. Within a week, she'd filed for divorce and included allegations of fraud, reproductive coercion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She'd also filed a motion to freeze our joint assets so Trevor couldn't drain the accounts before we got to court. The papers were served to him at his office, in front of his colleagues and his secretary and the business partners he'd spent years impressing. Lauren told me he'd gone pale when he read the first page, had actually stumbled backward into his desk. The response came 2 days later. A counter-filing from Trevor's attorney, some expensive shark named Gerald Morrison who specialized in protecting wealthy men during divorces. The document was 30 pages of character assassination. According to this version of reality, I was mentally unstable, had a history of emotional instability that Trevor had kindly overlooked, and was now making wild accusations to punish him for wanting to end the marriage. The reproductive coercion claims were described as delusional fantasies. The fraud allegations were called vindictive lies. The whole document painted me as an unhinged woman scorned, desperate to destroy a good man who'd simply fallen out of love. I read it in Lauren's office, my hands shaking so badly the pages rattled. Is any of this true? Lauren asked carefully. The claims about mental health history, previous relationships ending badly, financial instability before you met him? No, I said. None of it. I've never been in therapy except for the fertility counseling he encouraged. My previous relationships ended normally. I had a solid career and savings before we got married. This is all fabricated. Good, she said, taking the document back. Because we can disprove all of it. And when we do, it's going to make him look worse. She leaned back in her chair. He's scared, Natalie. This response tells me he knows we have something real and he's trying to discredit you before we can present evidence. It's a common tactic, but it's also a desperate one. What about the medical records? I asked. Can we get them? Marcus is working on it. He's got a contact at Cedar Hills who's willing to cooperate. We should have the vasectomy records by end of week. But here's where it gets interesting. She pulled out another folder. Marcus also started looking into the Cascade Fertility Center. The clinic where you supposedly received all those treatments. Supposedly? Natalie, that clinic barely exists. It has a website and a business license, but when Marcus went to the address listed, it's a mailbox service in a strip mall. No actual medical facility. No staff. No equipment. The phone number goes to an answering service that takes messages but never returns calls. The doctors listed on the website don't have active medical licenses in Oregon. I felt my stomach drop. So where did the $60,000 go? That's what we're trying to figure out. The checks were deposited into an account registered to Cascade Fertility Center LLC, but that account is linked to a shell corporation with Trevor listed as the registered agent. Essentially, he created a fake clinic, charged your joint account for fake treatments, and pocketed the money. She paused, watching my reaction. This isn't just lying about fertility anymore. This is structured fraud. Embezzlement from a joint marital account. The criminal implications are significant. I couldn't speak. Couldn't process. He'd built an entire fake medical clinic just to steal from our joint account while convincing me I was the problem. The level of planning, the calculated cruelty of it, the sheer audacity of creating false medical documents and fake appointments and a whole elaborate fiction just to maintain his lie, it was sociopathic. There's more, Lauren said gently. Marcus found records showing Trevor's been in a relationship with someone else. A woman named Chelsea fucking. She's 26, works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, they've been seeing each other for at least 18 months, maybe longer. He has an apartment he's been renting under an LLC name where she stays sometimes. Credit card receipts show he's been taking her on trips, buying her gifts, spending quite a bit of money on this relationship. The affair shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. After everything else, after the vasectomy and the fake clinic and the stolen money, the fact that he'd been cheating felt almost expected. But it still landed like a punch. 18 months meant he'd been with her through most of our fertility struggles. He'd been coming home from seeing his girlfriend and holding me while I cried about another failed cycle. He'd been spending our money on romantic getaways with her while telling me we needed to budget carefully for the next round of treatments. Does she know? I asked. About me? About what he did? We don't know yet. Marcus is trying to make contact with her. It's possible she has no idea he's married. It's also possible she's complicit. We'll find out. I left Lauren's office feeling like reality had shifted again. Each new piece of information required me to reconstruct my understanding of the past 6 years. Every memory was tainted now, every moment suspect. When had he been with her? When he claimed he was working late on the development project in Beaverton? When he said he had weekend site visits? When he told me he needed guys' nights with Kyle to decompress from the stress of our fertility issues? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it instead. The message was short and brutal. You're going to regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Drop the case or things will get much worse for you. I screenshotted it immediately and forwarded it to Lauren. Her response came back within minutes. File a police report. Now. This is witness intimidation and it's illegal. Don't respond. Don't engage. Document everything. I filed the police report at the downtown precinct, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair while a board officer took my statement. He barely looked up from his computer as I explained about the divorce case and the threatening text. When I mentioned Trevor's name, though, something shifted in his expression. Trevor Donovan? The real estate developer? Yes, I said. Do you know him? The officer's face went carefully neutral. I know of him. He's donated to several police fundraisers. Supported the new community center project. He paused. Look, I'll file this report, but you should know that without an explicit threat of violence, there's not much we can do about a text message. People say things they don't mean when they're going through divorces. It's witness intimidation, I said, hearing Lauren's words in my voice. In an active legal case. That's illegal regardless of who sent it. Like I said, the officer repeated, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. I'll file the report. I left the precinct understanding something new. Trevor had power in this city. He'd spent years building relationships, making donations, creating a network of people who owed him favors or admired him or wanted his support for their projects. He was beloved by the right people, respected by the business community, seen as a pillar of Portland's development boom. And I was just his unstable soon-to-be ex-wife making wild accusations. The realization should have scared me. Instead, it made me angry. A clean, focused anger that burned away the last remnants of self-doubt. Marcus Reed turned out to be nothing like I expected. I'd pictured a private investigator as some gritty noir character in a trench coat. Marcus showed up to our meeting in khakis and a polo shirt, looking more like a youth soccer coach than someone who dug up people's secrets for a living. But the manila folder he carried was thick with secrets, and his presentation was methodical and thorough. He spread documents across Lauren's conference table like he was laying out a hand of cards. Medical records from Cedar Hills Medical Center showing Trevor's vasectomy consultation and procedure 6 years and 3 months ago. Post-operative instructions. A follow-up appointment he'd actually kept 2 weeks after the surgery. Dr. Nguyen's notes describing the procedure as routine and successful. Insurance claims showing full coverage. Everything documented, official, undeniable. Next came the financial records. Bank statements showing the deposits from your joint account to Cascade Fertility Center LLC. Articles of incorporation for the shell company listing Trevor as registered agent. The lease agreement for the mailbox service. Email correspondence between Trevor and a web designer about creating the clinic website. Receipts for stock photos of smiling doctors and happy families used on the fake site. He'd spent months building this elaborate fiction, investing time and money into making it believable. Then Marcus dropped the truly damaging evidence. Medical records from actual fertility clinics showing that I had undergone treatments. Real treatments at real facilities. But the timing was off. The dates on these records were all from before Trevor and I started officially trying to conceive. Before the fake Cascade Fertility Center existed. These were from when I was 24, 25, going through a brief period where I'd had some irregular cycles and had seen a specialist who'd prescribed birth control to regulate my hormones. Nothing serious. Nothing that would prevent pregnancy. Trevor had taken these old records, Marcus explained, and somehow obtained copies through means we're still investigating. He then showed them to doctors at the fake appointments, suggesting you had a history of fertility issues. He used them to build his narrative that the problem was likely yours, that the specialists he was supposedly consulting all agreed your history made conception difficult. So he didn't just lie about his vasectomy, I said slowly. He actively built a medical history for me that didn't exist. Correct, Marcus said. And there's more. He pulled out another set of documents. These are the real reports from the actual fertility clinic you visited together when you first started trying. The one legitimate place you went for initial testing. I remembered that clinic. The bright waiting room with the magazines about parenting. The kind nurse who'd drawn my blood. The doctor who'd done the ultrasound and told me everything looked healthy. Trevor had been with me for some of those appointments, holding my hand, asking questions, playing the concerned husband. According to these records, Marcus continued, both of you underwent standard fertility testing. Your results came back completely normal. Hormone levels perfect, ovarian reserve excellent, everything indicating you should have no trouble conceiving naturally. Trevor's results, however, showed a sperm count of 0. Complete absence of sperm in his sample. The room felt like it was tilting. He knew, I said. From the very beginning, from those first tests, he knew the vasectomy had worked and his sperm count was 0. But he never told me. He let me think we were both fine and just needed to keep trying. He did more than that, Lauren interjected. Look at the dates on these reports. She pointed to the paperwork. You received your results. They were sent to both your email and his. But Trevor's results, the ones showing 0 sperm count, were only sent to an email address we've confirmed he controlled separately. You never saw his actual results. Because he told me everything looked good, I said, remembering. He said the doctor called him at work with the results and both of us were fine, just in the unexplained infertility category. He said we should try naturally for another 6 months before considering interventions. He lied, Marcus said simply. And then he started the fake clinic scheme about 3 months later. Once he'd established that you were willing to pursue fertility treatments, he created Cascade Fertility Center and started funneling money into it. How much? I asked. Total. How much did he steal? Marcus pulled out a spreadsheet. Based on the bank records we've obtained so far, approximately $87,000 over 2.5 years. The charges started small, $300 here, $500 there, described as consultation fees and initial testing. Then they escalated to larger amounts for supposed procedures. IUI attempts. Hormone treatments. Specialized imaging. All fake. All money that went straight into his shell corporation account. What did he do with it? Where did the money go from there? That's where it gets interesting, Marcus said. He pulled out more paperwork. The money was transferred from the Cascade Fertility account into several different accounts. One appears to be for the apartment he's renting for his girlfriend. Another funded a boat purchase last year. A third seems to be a general slush fund for entertainment and travel. Essentially, he stole from your joint account to fund his separate life with his girlfriend while keeping you trapped in the marriage through the fertility lie. Lauren leaned forward. This is the strongest case of financial fraud in a divorce I've handled in 15 years, she said. Combined with the reproductive coercion, the false medical documentation, the fake clinic, the affair funded with stolen marital assets, we have enough to bury him legally. The question is how hard you want to push. I looked at the documents spread across the table. Evidence of 6 years of systematic deception. Proof that everything I'd believed about my marriage, my body, my failures, had been carefully constructed lies. I thought about Trevor sitting in his fancy office, confident that his money and connections would protect him. I thought about the threatening text message and the police officer who dismissed my report because Trevor donated to fundraisers. I want to push hard enough that he never does this to anyone else, I said. Hard enough that Chelsea and any future woman knows exactly who he is. Hard enough that every person who thinks he's such a great guy understands what he's capable of. Then we go public, Lauren said. We don't just fight this in divorce court. We file criminal complaints for fraud and embezzlement. We contact the state medical board about the fake clinic. We make sure the story gets to the press. Are you prepared for that? For your private pain to become public knowledge? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Marcus gathered his documents back into the folder. I'll continue investigating. There are still some financial threads I want to follow, and I'm trying to arrange a conversation with the girlfriend. She might be willing to provide testimony if she realizes she's been used too. After they left, I sat alone in Lauren's conference room looking out at the Portland skyline. The city looked different now, sharper somehow. I'd spent 6 years moving through it in a fog of trying to get pregnant, of believing I was broken, of focusing all my energy on fixing a problem that didn't exist. Now the fog had lifted and I could see clearly. The view was harsh but honest. My phone rang. An unknown number, but I answered it anyway. I'd stopped being afraid of phone calls. Natalie Harper? A woman's voice, young, uncertain. Yes, who is this? My name is Chelsea Porter. I think we need to talk about Trevor. The coffee shop she'd chosen was in a neighborhood I didn't know, far enough from downtown that we were unlikely to run into anyone Trevor knew. I got there 20 minutes early and sat at a corner table, watching the door. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately even though we'd never met. She looked exactly like someone Trevor would choose. Tall, blonde, athletic, young. Everything he'd told me he found attractive back when we were dating, back when I'd felt special to be chosen by him. She ordered something complicated at the counter, then turned and scanned the room. Our eyes met. I saw her take a breath, square her shoulders, and walk over. Natalie? She set her cup down and sat across from me without waiting for permission. I'm Chelsea. I know, I said. I've seen photos. That made her flinch. Photos, she repeated. Right. So you know about us. About the relationship. I know Trevor's been seeing you for at least 18 months while lying to me about working late. I know he rented an apartment for you using money he embezzled from our joint account. I know he bought you gifts and took you on trips while I was at home crying over negative pregnancy tests. I paused. What I don't know is what he told you about me. She looked down at her coffee cup. He said you were separated. That the divorce was almost final but you were being difficult about it, dragging things out. He said you'd grown apart, that the marriage had been over for years but you wouldn't accept it. She met my eyes. He said there were no kids involved, that you'd both decided early on you didn't want children. I felt something crack open in my chest. No kids because he got a vasectomy 3 months before our wedding, I said quietly. No kids because he spent the last 2.5 years watching me blame myself for infertility while he stole almost $90,000 from our account to fund a fake fertility clinic. We weren't separated. We were actively trying to get pregnant. Or I was trying. He was actively preventing it and lying about everything. Chelsea's face went white. What? So I told her. All of it. The anniversary dinner, Dr. Nguyen's accidental reveal, the medical records, the fake clinic, the embezzled money. I watched her expression shift from disbelief to horror to something that looked like she might be sick. When I finished, she just sat there staring at nothing. He told me you were crazy, she finally said. That you'd accused him of all kinds of things during the separation. That you were making up lies to hurt him. He showed me texts from you that seemed, I don't know, unhinged. Desperate. She looked at me. Were those real? Probably real texts taken out of context, I said. Or possibly fabricated. At this point, I wouldn't put anything past him. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward me. These are the messages he showed me. Said they were from you. I read them. Desperate pleas to talk things through. Accusations of infidelity. Threats to expose him. They were supposedly from my number, but I'd never sent them. The style was wrong, the phrasing wasn't how I spoke. He'd faked texts from me to show his girlfriend as proof I was unstable. Those aren't from me, I said. But they're from your number. He had access to my phone. Or he knows how to spoof numbers. I don't know. I handed her phone back. The point is, everything he told you about me was a lie designed to make you trust him and distrust anything I might say if you ever found out about me. Chelsea set her phone down like it had burned her. I'm such an idiot, she whispered. I believed everything. Every excuse for why we couldn't go certain places, why I couldn't meet his friends, why we had to keep things quiet. He said it was because the divorce wasn't final and his lawyer advised discretion. He said once everything was settled, we'd go public, move in together properly, start our real life. She laughed bitterly. I even felt sorry for him. Poor Trevor, stuck with a vindictive ex who wouldn't let him move on. Did he ever talk about wanting kids? I asked. With you, in the future? All the time, she said. It was part of his whole pitch about our future together. He'd talk about the family we'd have someday, the house with a yard, kids running around. He made it sound so real. She paused. But if he had a vasectomy 6 years ago, he was lying about that too. He never planned to have kids with me either. Probably not, I said. Unless he's planning to get it reversed, but that seems unlikely given how much effort he put into hiding it. We sat in silence for a moment. Two women who'd been manipulated by the same man in different ways for different purposes. I should have hated her. She'd been sleeping with my husband, helping him cheat, participating in the destruction of my marriage even if she didn't know that's what she was doing. But looking at her shocked face, her shaking hands, I couldn't find the energy for hatred. She was just another one of his victims. My lawyer wants to talk to you, I said finally. If you're willing. Your testimony about the affair, about the money he spent on you, about the lies he told, it all strengthens the case. What case? She asked. Is this just divorce or is it more? It's fraud. Embezzlement. Reproductive coercion. Criminal charges, not just civil. He's going to face real consequences, but only if we can prove everything. Your testimony would help. She nodded slowly. What would I have to do? Give a deposition. Maybe testify if it goes to trial. Tell the truth about your relationship, the timeline, the money he spent, the things he told you. I paused. I know it's humiliating. Admitting you were the other woman, having to detail the affair. But if you want him to actually face consequences for what he did to both of us, this is how. Chelsea looked out the window at the gray Portland afternoon. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. He told me he loved me, she said. Said I was the one he'd been waiting for his whole life. Said the marriage was a mistake he'd made young and was finally correcting. I believed him because why would someone lie about something like that? Who does that? Trevor does, I said. It's who he is. She turned back to me. I'll talk to your lawyer. I'll tell them everything. And Natalie? I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I really am sorry. If I'd known, if I'd had any idea he was lying about the separation, I never would have gotten involved. I believe you, I said, and I did. She'd been manipulated just like I had, just with different tactics and different lies. Trevor was good at figuring out what people needed to hear, what vulnerabilities to exploit, how to construct a version of reality that served his purposes. He'd told me I was the love of his life and we'd build a family together. He'd told Chelsea I was his crazy ex preventing him from moving on. Both were lies designed to keep us exactly where he wanted us. We left the coffee shop separately, like we'd arranged a drug deal instead of an alliance. I drove back to Vanessa's apartment with Chelsea's words echoing in my head. The house with a yard. Kids running around. The same future he'd promised me 6 years ago when he proposed on that beach. The same future he'd been systematically ensuring could never happen even as he kept the promise alive with words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the girl I'd been when I met Trevor. 24 years old, fresh out of design school, excited about starting my own business. I'd been confident then, sure of myself and my abilities. Somewhere over 6 years, that confidence had eroded. He'd done it gradually, so slowly I hadn't noticed. Suggestions that maybe I should keep my business small rather than taking on too many clients. Concerns that stress might affect my fertility. Encouragement to spend more time on wellness and self-care rather than pursuing big projects. Each suggestion reasonable on its own, but together they'd narrowed my world down until it revolved around trying to get pregnant and very little else. My design business had suffered. I'd turned down major projects because Trevor said the timing wasn't right. I needed to focus on my health. I'd let friendships fade because I was too embarrassed to keep explaining why I wasn't pregnant yet. I'd stopped going to industry events and networking functions because Trevor said the stress of socializing was counterproductive. He'd isolated me financially, emotionally, professionally, and personally. And he'd done it all while seeming supportive, concerned, loving. The man was a monster who wore a very convincing mask. The deposition happened in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. Chelsea sat across from Trevor's lawyer, Gerald Morrison, who looked like every corporate attorney in every legal drama, expensive suit, Rolex watch, and a smile that promised he'd destroy you while billing $600 an hour. Lauren sat beside Chelsea, occasionally placing a calming hand on her arm when Morrison's questions got particularly aggressive. I watched from behind a one-way mirror, something Lauren had arranged so I could observe without being in the same room as Chelsea. It felt surreal, watching my husband's girlfriend answer questions about their relationship while Trevor's lawyer tried to discredit her testimony. Morrison was good at his job. He made Chelsea's youth sound like naivety, her belief in Trevor's lies sound like willful ignorance, her testimony sound like the vindictive rantings of a scorned mistress. But Chelsea held firm. When Morrison asked if she'd known Trevor was married, she looked him straight in the eye and said yes, but I was told the marriage was over and divorce was imminent. When he suggested she'd been complicit in fraud, she detailed every lie Trevor had told her about our separation, the fake text messages he'd shown her, the elaborate story about a wife who wouldn't let go. When Morrison tried to paint her as a gold digger, she pulled out her own bank statements showing she'd actually lent Trevor money on several occasions, money he'd claimed he needed for legal fees related to our divorce. That detail made me sit up straighter. Trevor had borrowed money from his girlfriend while embezzling from our joint account. The audacity was almost impressive. After 3 hours, Morrison finally ran out of ways to attack her credibility. Lauren walked Chelsea out, then came to get me from the observation room. She did well, Lauren said. Better than I expected, actually. She didn't waver on any of the important details, and Morrison's attempts to discredit her mostly just made him look like he was bullying a young woman. That plays well for us. What happens now? I asked. Now we prepare for your deposition. Trevor's team will go after you much harder than they went after Chelsea. They'll try to paint you as mentally unstable, vindictive, someone who's fabricating elaborate lies because you can't accept that your marriage failed. You need to be ready for that. The thought of sitting across from Morrison while he picked apart my life, my mental health, my credibility, made my stomach turn. But I'd come too far to back down now. Lauren must have seen something in my face because she squeezed my shoulder. You're stronger than you think, she said. And unlike Chelsea, you have documentation for everything. Medical records, bank statements, text messages, voicemails. They can attack your character all they want, but they can't attack facts. My deposition was scheduled for the following week. I spent the intervening days preparing with Lauren, going over every detail of our marriage, the fertility journey, the discovery of Trevor's vasectomy. She asked me every horrible question Morrison would ask, made me answer them over and over until my responses were clear and consistent. She prepared me for the ways he'd try to twist my words, make me seem emotional or irrational or vengeful. The night before the deposition, I barely slept. I kept replaying moments from our marriage, seeing them through this new lens of understanding. The way Trevor had always insisted on handling our finances because I was too busy with my design work. How he discouraged me from keeping separate accounts because married couples should trust each other completely. The concern he'd shown when I'd mentioned feeling depressed about the fertility struggles, his gentle suggestion that maybe I should see a therapist to work through my feelings. At the time, I'd thought he was being supportive. Now I understood he'd been building a paper trail of mental health concerns in case he ever needed to discredit me. The deposition room was smaller than I expected, claustrophobic even with just 5 people present. Morrison sat directly across from me, his recorder positioned between us like a barrier. Lauren sat to my right, close enough that I could feel her presence as an anchor. The court reporter set up her equipment with practiced efficiency, and then we began. Morrison started gentle, asking basic questions about my background, education, work history. He made it all sound so reasonable, so conversational. Then he shifted. "Mrs. Harper, when did you first suspect your husband was having an affair?" "I didn't," I said carefully, the way Lauren and I had practiced. "I discovered the vasectomy first. The affair came to light during the investigation that followed." "But you've had suspicions before, haven't you?" Morrison pulled out a document. "According to your own text messages, you accused Mr. Donovan of cheating on at least 4 occasions over the past 2 years. I accused him of acting distant," I corrected. "Of being preoccupied. I thought it was stress from work. I didn't know about Chelsea Porter until my attorney's investigator found evidence of the relationship." Morrison made a note. "So you admit to being suspicious, jealous perhaps? The kind of suspicions that might make someone create elaborate stories about fake medical procedures and embezzlement?" I felt Lauren tense beside me. This was the trap we prepared for. "I'm not creating stories," I said evenly. "I have medical records from Cedar Hills Medical Center documenting my husband's vasectomy. I have bank statements showing $87,000 transferred from our joint account to a fake fertility clinic he created. I have testimony from his girlfriend confirming the affair and the money he spent on her. These aren't stories. These are documented facts." Morrison smiled like I'd said exactly what he wanted me to say. Medical records that could have been fabricated. Bank statements that might have innocent explanations. Testimony from a spurned mistress who has her own reasons to lie. "Mrs. Harper, isn't it true that you've been in therapy for depression and anxiety related to fertility struggles?" "Yes," I said. "Therapy my husband encouraged me to attend. Therapy he paid for and controlled access to. Therapy I needed because he was gaslighting me into believing my body was defective." "Gaslighting," Morrison repeated, like the word amused him. "That's a very trendy term. Tell me, Mrs. Harper, did your therapist diagnose you with any conditions? Paranoid tendencies perhaps? Delusional thinking?" Lauren cut in. Asked and answered. "My client has already stated she attended therapy for depression and anxiety, which are common responses to infertility struggles. There's no diagnosis of paranoia or delusion in her medical records." Morrison turned to her. "But there could be, couldn't there? Depression and anxiety can manifest in many ways. Obsessive thoughts, false beliefs, difficulty accepting reality." "I am accepting reality," I said, and I heard my voice rise slightly. Lauren's hand touched my arm in warning. "The reality is that my husband lied to me for 6 years. He stole nearly $90,000. He created an entire fake medical clinic. He got a vasectomy before our wedding and never told me. That's reality. That's documented, provable reality." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Or it's the reality of a woman who can't have children and needs someone to blame. A woman who's constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory to avoid accepting that sometimes marriages fail and bodies don't cooperate. Tell me, Mrs. Harper, have you considered that your obsession with these allegations might be a coping mechanism for dealing with infertility grief?" That question hung in the air like poison. It was exactly what Trevor wanted people to think. That I was so broken by infertility, so desperate for someone to blame, that I'd invented this entire nightmare. That the medical records were misinterpreted, the bank statements misunderstood, the testimony from Chelsea just the rantings of 2 women scorned. My therapist's records will show that my mental health issues were directly caused by my husband's deception and abuse, I said slowly, clearly. Every session where I discussed feelings of inadequacy, every time I cried about my supposedly broken body, every moment of depression and anxiety was a direct result of Trevor's lies. The grief wasn't about infertility. It was about being systematically manipulated and abused. Morrison made more notes. "We'll see what the therapist's records actually say, won't we? When we subpoena them." Lauren's voice went cold. "You can try to subpoena therapy records, Mr. Morrison, but you'll find that Oregon law protects mental health privacy rather strictly. Unless you can demonstrate extreme necessity, which you cannot, those records remain privileged." The deposition continued for another 2 hours. Morrison asked about my relationship with my parents, trying to establish a history of family dysfunction. He asked about my business, trying to suggest financial desperation as a motive for making false claims. He asked about my friendships, trying to paint me as isolated and unstable. Every question was designed to make me seem like an unreliable narrator of my own life. But I held steady. For every attack on my character, I had a documented fact. For every suggestion that I was lying, I had evidence. Medical records don't lie. Bank statements don't have false memories. The paper trail Trevor had unwittingly created while committing fraud was now the noose that would hang him. When it finally ended, I felt like I'd been through a fight. My jaw ached from clenching it. My hands were cramped from gripping the edge of the table. But I'd survived it. I'd answered every question without breaking, without giving Morrison ammunition to use against me. Lauren walked me out to my car. "You did perfectly," she said. "He tried every trick in the book and you stayed calm and factual. That's exactly what we needed. He's going to subpoena my therapist, isn't he?" "He'll try. We'll fight it. But Natalie, even if he somehow gets access to those records, there's nothing in them that hurts your case. You were honest with your therapist about your feelings. That honesty doesn't make you unstable, it makes you human." I drove back to Vanessa's apartment in a daze. She was waiting with Thai food and wine, had cleared her evening to be there when I got back. I collapsed on her futon and told her everything while she listened and occasionally refilled my glass. "He's going to keep fighting, isn't he?" I said finally. "He's never going to just admit what he did and face consequences. He's going to drag this out, try to destroy my credibility, make everyone think I'm crazy." "Probably," Vanessa agreed. "But here's the thing. The longer he fights, the more evidence you gather. The harder he pushes, the more desperate he looks. And eventually, the truth is going to be so overwhelming that no amount of expensive lawyers can spin it." I wanted to believe her. But I also knew that rich men got away with terrible things all the time because they could afford to fight longer and harder than their victims could withstand. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus called Lauren, who called me, excitement clear in her voice even over the phone. "We found the clinic," she said. "The real one where Trevor had his vasectomy consultations. Cedar Hills Medical Center has security camera footage from 6 years ago. They keep everything archived digitally. Marcus got access to the footage from the week of Trevor's procedure." "And?" I prompted. "And it shows Trevor entering the urology department, sitting in the waiting room, being called back by Dr. Nguyen. It's time-stamped, date-stamped, completely verifiable. But here's the really interesting part. In one shot, you can clearly see him filling out paperwork at the reception desk. The forms ask about marital status and whether you've discussed the procedure with your partner. Marcus got copies of those intake forms from the medical records department." I held my breath. "He checked the box saying he was single," Lauren continued. "Deliberately lied on official medical documents to ensure you couldn't be contacted or consulted about a permanent sterilization procedure that would affect both of you. That's not just lying to you anymore, Natalie. That's medical fraud. And it demonstrates clear intent to deceive from the very beginning." The implications settled over me. Trevor hadn't just gotten a vasectomy and failed to mention it. He'd actively taken steps to ensure I'd never find out, had lied on official documents, had planned the deception from day one. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding or even just a betrayal. It was premeditated, calculated fraud. "There's more," Lauren said. "Dr. Nguyen is willing to testify." Marcus spoke with her, explained the situation, and she's appalled. She says she specifically asks patients if they've discussed vasectomy with their partners when they indicate they're in a relationship. She trusted Trevor's declaration that he was single. She feels she was used as an unwitting accomplice in his deception, and she wants to make it right. Having a doctor willing to testify changed everything. This wasn't just he said, she said anymore. This was a medical professional with no stake in the outcome confirming that Trevor had lied, that he deliberately deceived medical staff to hide a procedure from his future wife. The other development came through Chelsea. She'd been going through her own phone and email records, documenting her relationship with Trevor for her deposition. In the process, she'd found something interesting. An email from Trevor sent about 8 months ago, shortly after they'd started discussing moving in together officially once our divorce was finalized. The email was Trevor explaining why they needed to wait a bit longer to start trying for kids. He cited his age, wanting to be financially stable, making sure their relationship was solid first. All reasonable explanations. But then he'd added something that made my blood run cold. Besides, the email read, "I want to make sure we do this right. I've seen what happens when couples rush into having kids before they're ready. My marriage failed partly because of the pressure and stress of fertility treatments. I don't want us to go through that. Let's enjoy just being us for a while longer." Chelsea had forwarded the email to Lauren with a note. "He was lying to me about wanting kids just like he lied to you. He was never planning to have children with either of us." Lauren brought all of this to our next meeting. "We now have multiple threads of evidence that Trevor engaged in a pattern of deception regarding fertility and family planning with multiple women," she said, spreading documents across her desk. "The vasectomy he hid from you. The fake clinic he created to steal your money. The lies he told Chelsea about future children. The medical fraud at Cedar Hills. The embezzlement of marital funds. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. I'm recommending we file criminal charges." "Criminal charges," I repeated. "Like actual jail time?" "Potentially. Wire fraud, embezzlement, medical document fraud, reproductive coercion. Oregon has statutes covering all of these. The district attorney would have to decide whether to prosecute, but with this much evidence, I think they'd seriously consider it." The thought of Trevor in an orange jumpsuit being led away in handcuffs should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt heavy. This was the man I'd loved, or thought I'd loved. The man I'd promised forever to. Sending him to prison felt like admitting that everything about our relationship had been a lie from the beginning. Lauren must have read my hesitation. "You don't have to decide right now," she said gently. "But I want you to think about something. If you don't pursue criminal charges, if you just settle the divorce quietly, what happens to the next woman Trevor dates? What happens when he tells her he wants kids, goes through the same charade, steals her money and years of her life? Are you comfortable knowing you could have stopped that and chose not to?" That question stayed with me for days. I thought about Chelsea, who'd already wasted 18 months on a man who was lying about wanting a future with her. I thought about the next young woman Trevor would charm with his plans for a family and a white picket fence while hiding the fact that he'd made biological fatherhood impossible. I thought about the next wife who'd blame herself for infertility while he watched and calculated how to profit from her suffering. I called Lauren back 3 days later. "File the charges," I said. "All of them." The criminal complaint was filed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was all over the local news. Real estate developer Trevor Donovan charged with fraud and reproductive coercion. The story had everything the media loved: wealth, deception, a sympathetic victim, and the titillating details of a fertility scandal. My name was kept out of the initial reports at Lauren's insistence, but Trevor's photo was everywhere, his face looking shocked and caught off guard in what was clearly a parking lot ambush by reporters. My phone exploded with messages. Friends I hadn't talked to in years reaching out to ask if I was okay. Former design clients expressing shock and support. My mother calling from Eugene to ask what on earth was happening because she'd seen the news and recognized Trevor's photo. Even some of Trevor's friends contacted me, people I'd thought would automatically take his side, to say they'd always suspected something was off about him. The weirdest message came from Kyle Preston, Trevor's supposed best friend. The text was short: "I'm sorry. I should have said something. I knew about Chelsea. I didn't know about the rest, but I knew he was cheating and I said nothing. That's on me." I stared at that text for a long time. Kyle had known Trevor was having an affair and had stayed silent. How many others had known? How many people had watched me struggle with fertility while knowing Trevor was lying? The betrayal extended beyond just my husband. It encompassed an entire social circle that had chosen to protect him instead of warning me. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Trevor was released on bail, ordered to stay away from me, and suspended from his position at the development company pending the outcome of the case. His bail was $250,000, which he posted immediately. The man had money stashed everywhere, apparently. Lauren warned me that he'd probably try to reach out, either directly or through intermediaries. Sure enough, 2 days after the charges were filed, his mother showed up at Vanessa's apartment. I recognized Diane Donovan through the peephole, perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer handbag, expression of refined disapproval. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Mrs. Donovan," I said. "You shouldn't be here." She looked me up and down with obvious disdain. "We need to talk," she said. "About this ridiculous situation you've created." I created? I felt a laugh building in my throat, slightly hysterical. "Your son got a vasectomy before our wedding, created a fake medical clinic to embezzle money, and lied to me for 6 years. I didn't create this situation. I'm just refusing to stay silent about it anymore." "Trevor made mistakes," she acknowledged. "But you're destroying his life over a marital dispute that should be handled privately." "Criminal charges? Going to the media? That's vindictive, Natalie. That's beneath you." "What's beneath me is being lied to for 6 years while your son stole my money and watched me blame myself for infertility he caused," I said. "What's beneath me is staying quiet so he can do this to someone else." Her expression hardened. "You were never going to make him happy," she said. "You were always too focused on your little design projects, too independent, too unwilling to put his needs first. He needed a real partner, someone who understood that a man like Trevor requires support and flexibility." "A real partner," I repeated slowly. "You mean someone who'd let him steal and lie and cheat without consequences? Someone who'd smile and look pretty while he did whatever he wanted?" "Sorry, Mrs. Donovan, but I'm not that person. I never was." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. "This conversation is over. You need to leave. And tell Trevor that any attempt to contact me through family or friends will be reported to the court as bail violation." I closed the door in her face. Through the peephole, I watched her stand there for a moment, shock and anger warring on her features. Finally, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete. Vanessa emerged from her bedroom where she'd been listening. "Trevor's mom seems lovely," she said dryly. "The apple didn't fall far from that tree," I said. She actually tried to blame me for his behavior. Like if I'd just been more supportive and less focused on my career, he wouldn't have had to lie and steal and cheat. "Classic enabler logic," Vanessa said. "It's never the golden boy's fault. It's always the woman who didn't manage his emotions properly." She handed me a glass of wine. "For what it's worth, you handled that perfectly. Didn't engage with her manipulation, set clear boundaries, shut it down." I felt shaky, adrenaline making my hands tremble slightly. Part of me wanted to feel guilty for how I'd spoken to Trevor's mother. But a larger part, the part that was slowly learning to trust my own perceptions again, knew I'd done exactly the right thing. I didn't owe anyone politeness or deference or the benefit of the doubt. Not anymore. The media coverage intensified over the next 2 weeks. Investigative reporters started digging into Trevor's business dealings and found more irregularities. Client funds moved in questionable ways. Development projects with inflated budgets and unexplained cost overruns. Business partners who'd been edged out under suspicious circumstances. The fertility fraud had opened a door, and now journalists were finding all sorts of interesting things behind it. Trevor's company put him on administrative leave. Then, quietly, they announced his resignation. The official statement cited personal matters and a desire to focus on his legal situation. The unofficial whispers were that the board had forced him out after discovering financial discrepancies that made them concerned about potential liability. His world was collapsing in real time, and I watched it happen with complicated feelings. There was satisfaction, yes. Vindication. The proof that I'd been right, that my accusations weren't the delusional rantings of a bitter ex-wife but the truth about a man who'd hurt multiple people. But there was also grief. Not for Trevor as he was, but for the person I'd thought he was. For the marriage I'd believed we had. For the 6 years I'd lost to his lies. Lauren called 3 days before the hearing. "We have a problem," she said, and my stomach dropped. Trevor's team has filed a motion to suppress the medical records from Cedar Hills. They're claiming they were obtained illegally, that Marcus violated HIPAA regulations in getting access to them. Can they do that? I asked. They can try. We're fighting it obviously. The records were obtained through proper legal channels with appropriate authorization from Dr. Nguyen, who's a willing party to the case. But Morrison is good at creating procedural obstacles. We might need to argue this before the judge before the hearing can proceed. What happens if they succeed? If the medical records are suppressed? Then we lose our strongest piece of physical evidence, Lauren admitted. We'd still have the bank statements showing the fake clinic, Chelsea's testimony about the affair, the intake forms showing he lied about being single. But the vasectomy records themselves would be off the table. That's everything, I said. Without those records, how do we prove he even had the vasectomy? He could claim it was a different Trevor Donovan, that the whole thing is a case of mistaken identity. Which is exactly what his team is hoping for, Lauren said. They want to muddy the waters, create reasonable doubt. Don't panic yet. We have strong arguments for why the records were legally obtained. Let me handle this. The suppression hearing was scheduled for the day before the preliminary hearing. Lauren filed an emergency brief arguing that the medical records were essential evidence in a criminal fraud case, that Dr. Nguyen had consented to their release, that patient privacy concerns were outweighed by the need for justice in a case involving reproductive coercion and financial fraud. Morrison filed his own brief painting Marcus as a rogue investigator who'd violated federal privacy laws, suggesting the entire investigation was tainted, implying that if the medical records were suppressed, all derivative evidence should be excluded as fruit of the poisonous tree. I sat in the courtroom gallery while lawyers argued over whether the proof of my husband's betrayal could be used against him. The judge, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, listened impassively to both sides. When they finished, she announced she'd issue a ruling by the end of the day. Those hours of waiting were torture. I sat in a cafe near the courthouse, staring at my phone, unable to focus on anything. If we lost this motion, if the vasectomy records were suppressed, the entire case might fall apart. Trevor might walk away from all of it with nothing more than a failed marriage and some awkward publicity. At 4:30, Lauren called. "We won," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. The judge ruled that the records were properly obtained, that Dr. Nguyen had every right to release information about her own medical practice when that practice had been used in the commission of fraud. The vasectomy records stay in. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So the hearing tomorrow proceeds as planned? As planned, Lauren confirmed. And Natalie? The judge made some pointed comments in her ruling about the severity of reproductive coercion and the public interest in prosecuting these kinds of cases. She's signaling that she takes this seriously. That's good for us. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, I'd face Trevor in court for the first time since the anniversary dinner. Tomorrow, a judge would decide if there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Tomorrow, the truth would start coming out in public record, unavoidable and undeniable. I thought about the girl I'd been 6 years ago, standing on that beach in Cannon Beach, saying yes to forever with a man I thought I knew. I wanted to go back and warn her. Tell her to ask more questions, demand more honesty, trust her instincts when things felt off. But that girl was gone now. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd learned that love without honesty was just a pretty lie, and that sometimes the only way through betrayal was to burn everything down and start over. Tomorrow, the burning would begin in earnest. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they should have. I climbed them slowly, Lauren on one side and Vanessa on the other, both of them forming a protective barrier against the cluster of reporters waiting near the entrance. Camera flashes went off like small explosions. Questions were shouted over each other, a cacophony of voices asking how I felt, what I expected from today's hearing. Did I have any comment on Trevor's statement to the press claiming I was fabricating everything out of spite? I kept my eyes forward and my mouth shut. Lauren had coached me extensively on this. Don't engage with the media until after the hearing. Don't give them anything they can twist or misquote. Let the evidence speak first, then we control the narrative afterward. Inside, the courthouse was quieter but no less tense. Security screening took forever, and then we were walking down corridors that smelled like floor polish and old paper, past courtrooms where other people's dramas were unfolding. Ours was at the end of the hall, and through the small window in the door, I could see it was already filling up with spectators. This hearing was open to the public, which meant anyone could walk in and watch my private pain become public record. Trevor was already seated at the defense table when we entered. He didn't look at me. Kept his eyes fixed on the documents in front of him, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. He'd lost weight, I noticed. His expensive suit hung slightly loose on his frame. His hair, usually impeccably styled, looked hastily combed. Gerald Morrison sat beside him, looking far more composed than his client, organizing papers with calm efficiency. We took our seats at the prosecution table. The assistant district attorney handling the criminal charges was a woman named Rachel Winters, mid-40s, with dark skin and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. She'd met with Lauren and me twice before today, going over my testimony, reviewing the evidence, making sure we were all aligned on strategy. The gallery behind us continued to fill. I recognized some faces. Chelsea was there, sitting near the back, her expression unreadable. A few of Trevor's business associates, probably there to see if their own dealings might come under scrutiny. Some reporters with notebooks. A couple of women I didn't know but who wore expressions of grim solidarity that made me think they'd survived their own versions of this story. The bailiff called us to order, and Judge Margaret Chin entered from her chambers. She was the same judge who'd ruled on the suppression motion, which Lauren considered a good sign. Judge Chen had already indicated she understood the severity of reproductive coercion cases. She settled into her seat, adjusted her reading glasses, and surveyed the courtroom with the air of someone who'd presided over too many human disasters to be shocked by one more. This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of the state of Oregon versus Trevor James Donovan, she began, her voice carrying easily through the room. The purpose of this hearing is to determine whether there is sufficient probable cause to believe that the defendant committed the crimes charged: wire fraud, embezzlement, falsification of medical documents, and reproductive coercion. Ms. Winters, you may present the state's case. Rachel stood, buttoning her blazer in a gesture that seemed almost ritualistic. Your Honor, the state will present evidence showing that Mr. Donovan engaged in a calculated, multi-year scheme to defraud his wife, Natalie Harper, of both money and reproductive autonomy. She clicked a remote and a screen behind her lit up with a timeline. This scheme began 6 years ago, 3 months before Mr. Donovan's wedding, when he underwent a vasectomy and deliberately concealed this procedure from his future wife. The screen showed a photo of the Cedar Hills Medical Center. Rachel continued, methodically laying out the evidence. The medical records, including Dr. Nguyen's notes and the intake forms where Trevor had lied about being single. The security footage showing him entering and leaving the urology department. The post-operative instructions found in his personal files. Each piece of evidence was displayed on the screen, official and undeniable. Then she moved to the fake fertility clinic. The screen showed the Cascade Fertility Center website with its stock photos and false credentials. Rachel detailed how Trevor had created the shell corporation, registered it with the state, built a convincing website, and begun charging the joint marital account for treatments that never occurred at a facility that didn't exist. Over 2.5 years, she said, her voice taking on an edge, Mr. Donovan stole $87,342 from his wife through this fraudulent scheme. These funds were then used to support an extramarital affair, purchase luxury items for himself, and maintain a separate apartment for his girlfriend. The screen showed bank statements, highlighted transactions, the paper trail of stolen money. I watched Trevor's shoulders tense as his financial crimes were displayed for everyone to see. Morrison leaned over to whisper something to him, but Trevor shook his head slightly, his face carefully blank. Rachel called her first witness. Dr. Patricia Nguyen took the stand, was sworn in, and settled into the witness chair with the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to clinical settings. She wore a navy blue suit and minimal jewelry, her gray hair pulled back in the same sharp bob I'd seen at the restaurant. Dr. Nguyen, Rachel began, can you confirm that you performed a vasectomy on the defendant on March 15, 6 years ago? Yes, Dr. Nguyen said clearly. I performed a bilateral vasectomy on Trevor Donovan on that date. The procedure was routine and successful. And what was your standard practice regarding discussing vasectomy with a patient's partner? For any patient who indicated they were in a relationship or married, I always asked if they discussed the decision with their partner. Vasectomy is a permanent form of birth control, and it affects both people in a relationship. I considered it my responsibility to ensure both parties were making an informed decision. And did you ask Mr. Donovan if he discussed this procedure with his partner? I did. Dr. Nguyen's expression tightened slightly. However, on his intake paperwork, Mr. Donovan had indicated he was single. Based on that information, I didn't pursue further questions about partner consultation. Rachel displayed the intake form on the screen, zooming in on the box where Trevor had checked single and signed his name. If you had known Mr. Donovan was engaged to be married in 3 months, would that have changed your approach? Absolutely, Dr. Nguyen said without hesitation. I would have required documentation that his fiancée was aware of and consented to the procedure, or at minimum, I would have strongly recommended he discuss it with her before proceeding. Vasectomy reversal is possible but not guaranteed, and the cost can be prohibitive. It's a decision that should be made with full transparency in a committed relationship. Morrison stood for cross-examination. Dr. Nguyen, isn't it true that you have no way of verifying what my client's relationship status was at the time of the procedure? He could have been single and then met his future wife afterward. The procedure was in March, Dr. Nguyen said. They were married in June. That's 3 months. In my medical opinion, it's highly unlikely he went from single to married in that timeframe without having been in the relationship during the consultation period. But you don't know that definitively, Morrison pressed. You're speculating about his personal life based on timeline assumptions. I'm stating medical facts based on documented dates, Dr. Nguyen replied coolly. And I'm expressing my professional opinion that a patient who lies about relationship status on intake forms is demonstrating intent to deceive medical staff, which raises serious ethical concerns about informed consent. Morrison tried a few more angles but couldn't shake her testimony. Dr. Nguyen left the stand with her credibility intact, and I saw a few jurors, wait, this wasn't a jury trial yet, several spectators nodding as she passed. The message was clear. Trevor had lied to his doctor to hide the vasectomy from me. Next, Rachel called Marcus Reed to the stand. He detailed his investigation, the financial forensics that had uncovered the Shell Corporation and fake clinic. He showed receipts for the website design, the mailbox rental, the stock photos. He explained how he traced the money from the joint account through the Cascade Fertility Center LLC and into accounts Trevor controlled, then out again to the apartment rental for Chelsea, the boat purchase, the various luxury expenditures. Under Morrison's cross-examination, Marcus remained unflappable. Yes, he'd been hired by my attorney. No, that didn't mean his findings were biased. The financial records spoke for themselves. The Shell Corporation existed in public records. The money trail was documented in bank statements any forensic accountant could verify. Then Rachel called Chelsea to the stand. I watched her walk to the witness box, her nervousness obvious in the way she clutched her purse, the slight tremor in her hands as she was sworn in. But when Rachel began questioning her, Chelsea's voice was steady. She described the relationship with Trevor, how he'd presented himself as separated and nearly divorced, how he'd shown her fake text messages supposedly from me proving I was unstable. She detailed the money he'd spent on her, the trips they'd taken, the apartment he'd rented where she sometimes stayed. She confirmed that Trevor had talked frequently about their future together, including having children. And did Mr. Donovan ever mention having had a vasectomy? Rachel asked. Never, Chelsea said. He talked about wanting kids with me all the time. It was part of his whole vision for our future together. If I'd known he'd had a vasectomy and was lying about it, I never would have continued the relationship. She looked directly at Trevor for the first time. I feel like I wasted 18 months of my life on someone who was never honest about anything. Morrison's cross-examination was brutal. He painted Chelsea as a knowing participant in an affair, suggested she'd pursued Trevor for his money, implied she was testifying now out of revenge for being dumped. Chelsea handled it better than I'd expected, never losing her composure, repeatedly bringing the focus back to Trevor's lies rather than her own choices. By the lunch recess, the state had established a clear pattern. Trevor had lied to medical professionals, lied to his wife, lied to his girlfriend, and constructed an elaborate fraud to steal marital assets. The evidence was overwhelming, documented in official records and corroborated by multiple witnesses. Lauren, Vanessa, and I ate lunch in a small conference room the courthouse made available to attorneys. I barely tasted the sandwich Vanessa had brought for me. My stomach was in knots anticipating the afternoon session, when I would have to take the stand and tell my story under oath while Trevor sat 15 feet away listening. "You're going to do fine," Lauren said, reading my expression. "Just answer the questions honestly. Don't volunteer extra information. If Morrison tries to rattle you, take your time before responding. Remember, the evidence speaks for itself. Your testimony is just putting a human face on the facts we've already established." The afternoon session began with Rachel calling me to the stand. I walked past Trevor's table without looking at him, raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. Sat down in the witness chair and tried to remember to breathe. Rachel started with basic background. My education, my career as an interior designer, how I'd met Trevor. Then she moved into the marriage, the decision to start trying for children, the beginning of what I'd believed was our shared fertility journey. "Mrs. Harper, when did you first learn that your husband had undergone a vasectomy?" "At our anniversary dinner 3 months ago," I said. "A doctor who'd performed the procedure recognized him at the restaurant and asked about his follow-up appointments. That was the first I'd heard of it." "And what was your reaction?" "I felt like the floor had disappeared," I said honestly. "We'd been trying to have children for 2.5 years. I'd undergone testing, taken medications that made me sick, blamed myself for failing to get pregnant. And suddenly I learned that it had been impossible the entire time because he'd made sure it was impossible." Rachel walked me through the discovery of the medical bill, the confrontation with Trevor, the realization that the Cascade Fertility Center was fake. She had me describe the support groups I'd attended where I'd shared my deepest insecurities with strangers while Trevor knew the whole narrative was false. She asked about the financial impact, the emotional toll, the way my business had suffered because I'd been so focused on fertility treatments. "How much money did you believe was being spent on legitimate medical care for fertility issues?" Rachel asked. "I thought we were spending around $60,000 to $70,000 over the 2.5 years, I said. "The clinic was expensive, but Trevor assured me it was worth it for the expertise. He handled all the payments and told me not to worry about the cost because we had good insurance and savings. I trusted him to manage that aspect while I focused on following the treatment protocols. And now that you know the clinic wasn't real, how do you feel about that trust?" "Betrayed," I said simply. "Not just by the lying, but by the way he let me blame myself. He watched me cry every month when I got my period. He held me when I broke down after negative pregnancy tests. He comforted me when I felt like my body was defective. And the entire time, he knew. He knew it was all a lie he'd created." Morrison's cross-examination was exactly as aggressive as Lauren had predicted. He started by suggesting I'd known about the vasectomy all along and only pretended to be surprised when the marriage deteriorated for other reasons. "Mrs. Harper, isn't it true that you and Mr. Donovan had discussed not having children before you married?" "No," I said firmly. "We explicitly discussed wanting children. It was part of our pre-marriage conversations. I told him I wanted at least 2 kids. He agreed that sounded perfect. But marriages change," Morrison said smoothly. "People change their minds about children. Isn't it possible that at some point in your marriage, you both decided not to have children and simply never formalized that decision?" "No," I said. "I never changed my mind. And if Trevor had, He could have told me instead of creating an elaborate fake medical clinic to pretend we were trying. Morrison tried another angle. You've admitted to being in therapy for depression and anxiety. Isn't it possible that your mental health struggles have colored your perception of events? That you've misinterpreted innocent actions as malicious? My mental health struggles were caused by being gaslit about my fertility for 2.5 years, I said, keeping my voice level. There's nothing to misinterpret about medical records showing a vasectomy I wasn't told about. There's nothing to misinterpret about bank statements showing money going to a fake clinic. Those are facts, not perceptions. He pressed on, trying to suggest I was financially motivated, that I'd fabricated the whole thing to get a better divorce settlement. But every time he asked a question designed to make me look vindictive or greedy, I redirected to the documented evidence. The medical records existed. The bank statements existed. The fake clinic existed. No amount of attacking my character could change those facts. After an hour, Morrison finally gave up. I stepped down from the witness stand feeling wrung out but steady. I'd told the truth clearly and consistently. I'd held my ground under hostile questioning. Whatever happened next, I'd done my part. Judge Chin called a brief recess before closing arguments. In the hallway, Vanessa hugged me hard. You were amazing in there, she whispered. You didn't let him shake you at all. Rachel gave her closing argument with precision and force. She summarized the evidence, connected all the dots, emphasized the premeditated nature of Trevor's actions. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, she said. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, multi-year scheme to defraud the victim of money and reproductive autonomy. The defendant lied to medical professionals to hide a permanent sterilization procedure from his fiancée. He created a fake medical clinic to embezzle marital funds. He maintained these lies for years while watching his wife suffer emotionally and physically. This is not only criminal fraud, it is reproductive coercion, which Oregon law recognizes as a serious form of domestic abuse. The evidence overwhelmingly establishes probable cause for all charges, and the state asks that this case be bound over for trial. Morrison's closing was predictable. He characterized everything as a bitter divorce where a scorned wife was making wild accusations. He suggested the medical records were misinterpreted, the financial transactions had innocent explanations. The whole case was built on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of biased witnesses. He painted Trevor as a successful businessman being destroyed by false allegations from a vindictive ex-wife who couldn't accept that the marriage had failed. Judge Chin listened to both arguments with her expression giving nothing away. When Morrison finished, she removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Trevor for a long moment. "Mr. Donovan," she said, and her tone made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. Medical records from a licensed physician confirming you underwent a vasectomy 3 months before your wedding. Intake forms where you falsely claimed to be single, preventing your future wife from being informed of or consulted about a procedure that would directly affect her. Financial records showing you created a shell corporation posing as a medical clinic and used it to embezzle nearly $90,000 from your joint marital account. Testimony from multiple witnesses corroborating these facts." She paused. The defense's argument that this is all misinterpretation or vindictive fabrication is, frankly, insulting to this court's intelligence. I saw Trevor's face go pale. Morrison's expression remained neutral but his hand tightened on his pen. The evidence presented today, Judge Chin continued, establishes not only probable cause but a clear pattern of premeditated fraud and abuse. Reproductive coercion is a serious crime in this state, and the evidence suggests you engaged in it systematically over multiple years. The financial fraud is documented in official banking records. The falsification of medical information is confirmed by the treating physician. She looked down at her notes, then back up. I am binding this case over for trial on all charges. Additionally, given the severity of the allegations and the defendant's apparent willingness to engage in deception, I am increasing the conditions of bail. Mr. Donovan, you are to have no contact with the victim, direct or indirect. You will surrender your passport. You will wear a GPS monitor. And you will be subject to random verification of compliance with these conditions. Violation of any of these terms will result in immediate revocation of bail and pretrial detention. Do you understand? Trevor nodded, his face ashen. Morrison leaned over to whisper urgently to him, but Trevor just sat there looking stunned. Trial is set for 8 weeks from today, Judge Chin said. Both counsel will submit proposed jury instructions by the deadline outlined in your scheduling order. She banged her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled for the exit to file their stories. I sat frozen in my chair, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. We'd won the preliminary hearing. All charges were moving forward to trial. Judge Chin had essentially signaled that she found Trevor's actions reprehensible and the evidence convincing. This was really happening. Trevor was going to face trial for what he'd done to me. Lauren put a hand on my shoulder. That was about as strong a ruling as we could have hoped for, she said quietly. Judge Chin could have found probable cause and moved forward without comment, but instead she made her opinion very clear. That sends a message to the jury pool, to the media, to everyone watching. This case has merit. Outside the courthouse, the reporters were waiting in force. Lauren had prepared a brief statement, which Rachel read to the cameras while I stood slightly behind her, trying to look composed. The statement expressed gratitude for the judge's decision, emphasized the seriousness of reproductive coercion, and noted that we looked forward to presenting the full case at trial. Then it was my turn to speak. Lauren had insisted I say something in my own words, brief but personal, to humanize the case before Trevor's team could spin the narrative. I stepped forward to the microphone cluster, my heart pounding. For 6 years, I said, and my voice only shook slightly, I believed I was the reason my husband and I couldn't have children. I underwent treatments, took medications, attended support groups, and blamed myself for infertility that didn't actually exist. I lost money, time, and part of myself to lies that were carefully constructed and maintained. I paused, gathering my thoughts. No one should have to endure what I endured. Reproductive coercion is abuse. Financial fraud is a crime. I'm grateful that the court is taking these charges seriously, and I hope my experience can help other victims understand that they don't have to stay silent. That their suffering matters. That the truth matters. Camera flashes went off like fireworks. Questions were shouted. Lauren guided me away from the microphones and toward her car, which was parked in a secure garage. We didn't speak during the drive back to her office. There was too much to process, too many emotions fighting for space in my chest. In Lauren's office, with the door closed and the blindness drawn, I finally let myself cry. Not sad tears exactly, but something more complicated. Relief and rage and grief and triumph all mixed together, leaving me gasping and shaking while Lauren sat beside me on the leather couch and just let me fall apart. You did it, she said when I'd finally cried myself out. You stood up, told the truth, and made them listen. That takes courage most people don't have. I don't feel courageous, I admitted. I feel exhausted. Courage often feels like exhaustion, she said. Because it takes everything you have. But Natalie, you need to understand something. Today changed the narrative. Before today, this was just allegations in a divorce filing, something people could dismiss as he said, she said. Now it's a criminal case with a judge finding probable cause on all charges. Now it's real in a way that can't be ignored or dismissed. You've already won something important, regardless of how the trial goes. I wanted to believe her. But I also knew that a preliminary hearing wasn't a conviction. Trevor still had his expensive lawyer, his connections, his money. He'd fight this with everything he had, and 8 weeks from now, we'd do this all over again with higher stakes and a jury watching. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Come home. I made dinner and bought wine. You need to eat and decompress. Home. That word felt strange. Vanessa's spare room wasn't home. The apartment I'd shared with Trevor wasn't home anymore. My parents' house in Eugene had never really been home after I'd left for college. I existed in a strange limbo, unmoored from any physical space I could call my own. But I texted back. On my way. Thank you for everything today. As Lauren drove me back to Vanessa's building, I watched Portland pass by the car window. The city looked different somehow. Maybe I was different. The woman who'd walked up those courthouse steps this morning had been afraid. The woman riding back down them now had stared her abuser in the face and watched a judge validate her truth. That had to count for something. 8 weeks until trial. 8 weeks to prepare for the final confrontation. 8 weeks until Trevor would have to answer for everything he'd done, in front of a jury that would decide his fate. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something close to anticipation. I'd spent 6 years living in the reality Trevor created. Now it was time to make him live in the reality I'd uncovered. The truth was coming, and there was nothing his money or lawyers or connections could do to stop it. The trial lasted 6 days. 6 days of testimony, evidence presentation, expert witnesses explaining financial forensics and reproductive coercion. 6 days of watching Trevor sit at the defense table, his expression carefully neutral, while witness after witness detailed his lies. 6 days of jury members taking notes, their faces revealing nothing about what they were thinking. Rachel Winters was methodical and relentless. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence, connected every thread, made the fraud so clear that even Morrison's attempts to create doubt fell flat. Dr. Nguyen testified again, this time with more detail about standard medical ethics and informed consent. Marcus presented his financial investigation with charts and timelines that showed exactly where the stolen money had gone. Chelsea described the lies Trevor had told her, the false promises, the elaborate fiction he'd maintained. And I testified for an entire day. Told the jury about the support groups where I'd shared my shame. The medications that made me nauseous and emotional. The negative pregnancy tests that felt like personal failures. The way Trevor had held me while I cried, all while knowing he'd made pregnancy impossible. Rachel asked me to describe what it felt like to discover the truth, and I told them honestly. Like waking up from a nightmare only to realize the nightmare was real and I'd been living in it for years. Morrison tried everything. He brought character witnesses who testified that Trevor was a respected businessman, a generous community member, someone who couldn't possibly be guilty of such calculated cruelty. He suggested I was exaggerating the emotional impact for sympathy. He implied the money had been spent on legitimate investments. He painted me as a woman scorned, desperate to punish her ex-husband. But the jury had seen the medical records. They'd heard Dr. Nguyen explain how Trevor lied on intake forms. They'd reviewed bank statements showing fake clinic charges. They'd watched security footage of Trevor entering the urology department. No amount of character assassination could erase documented facts. Closing arguments happened on a Friday afternoon. Rachel's was powerful, emotional without being manipulative. She reminded the jury that reproductive coercion wasn't just about preventing pregnancy. It was about control, about stripping someone of their autonomy, about making them doubt their own reality. She asked them to imagine spending years believing your body was broken while your partner knew the truth and said nothing. She called Trevor's actions what they were: cruel, calculated, and criminal. Morrison's closing argued reasonable doubt. He suggested alternative explanations for every piece of evidence, claimed the vasectomy was for medical reasons Trevor had been embarrassed to discuss, insisted the fake clinic was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. He reminded the jury that criminal convictions required proof beyond reasonable doubt, and doubt, he argued, was everywhere in this case. The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days. Those hours felt endless. I stayed in a hotel near the courthouse, unable to focus on anything, jumping every time my phone made a sound. Lauren kept me updated on the few signals we could read. The jury had requested to review the medical records twice. They'd asked for clarification on the legal definition of reproductive coercion. They'd sent a note asking if financial fraud required intent or if negligence was sufficient. When the call finally came that the jury had reached a verdict, my hands shook so badly that Vanessa had to button my coat for me. We walked back to the courthouse through gray Portland drizzle, the kind of rain that soaks through everything slowly. The courtroom was packed again, every seat filled with people who'd been following the case. Trevor looked thinner than he had at the start of the trial, his face drawn and pale. He didn't look at me as I took my seat. Just stared straight ahead at the empty jury box, waiting. The jury filed in silently. I searched their faces for clues but found nothing. They wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, just took their seats with expressions carefully blank. Judge Chin asked if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt, stood and said they had. On the count of wire fraud, how do you find? Judge Chin asked. Guilty. On the count of embezzlement? Guilty. On the count of falsification of medical documents? Guilty. On the count of reproductive coercion? The pause before he answered felt like it lasted forever. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambling for exits. Spectators murmuring. Someone behind me started crying. I just sat there, the word guilty echoing in my head like a bell. Trevor's shoulders slumped forward. Morrison immediately stood to request bail pending sentencing, but Judge Chin denied it. Given the severity and premeditated nature of these crimes, she said, the defendant is remanded to custody immediately. I watched bailiffs approach Trevor, watched them put handcuffs on his wrists. Watched him being led away through a side door, finally looking back at me with an expression I couldn't read. Anger maybe. Or resignation. Or just the dawning realization that consequences had finally caught up to him. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. Rachel told me the charges carried potential prison time, though she couldn't predict exactly how much Judge Chin would impose. Lauren started paperwork for the civil suit, which would be much easier now with criminal convictions to reference. Chelsea texted me a simple message, justice. Finally. The media coverage was overwhelming. The story had everything: wealthy developer, fertility fraud, hidden vasectomy, fake medical clinic. It went national, then international. I gave one interview to a magazine that focused on reproductive rights, telling my story in detail so other women might recognize the warning signs earlier than I had. The response was staggering. Hundreds of messages from women who'd experienced similar manipulation. Support groups forming. Legislators in 3 states introducing bills to strengthen laws around reproductive coercion. At sentencing, Judge Chin looked at Trevor with something close to disgust. Mr. Donovan, she said, you betrayed your wife in the cruelest way imaginable. You stole her money, her time, and her trust. You watched her suffer and did nothing. Worse than nothing, you perpetuated that suffering for your own benefit. She sentenced him to 8 years in prison, with restitution of the full amount stolen plus damages. 8 years. It felt both too much and not enough. No amount of prison time could give me back the years I'd lost or the innocence I'd had before I learned someone could lie so completely while claiming to love you. After sentencing, I stood on the courthouse steps one last time. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through clouds. A reporter asked how I felt. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I feel free, I said simply. For the first time in 6 years, I feel completely free. I started rebuilding slowly. Moved into a small apartment in a neighborhood I'd always loved. Relaunched my design business with renewed focus. Reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. Started therapy with a new counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. Some days were harder than others. Some days I still felt the weight of what had happened. But those days became fewer. A year after the trial, I took a trip to the coast. Stood on a different beach than the one where Trevor had proposed, watched waves crash against rocks, and felt the salt spray on my face. I thought about the girl who'd said yes to forever 6 years ago. She'd been naive but not stupid. Trusting but not weak. She'd believed in love and promises and building a future with someone. She hadn't been wrong to believe those things. She'd just believed them with the wrong person. I pulled out the necklace I'd reclaimed after the trial, the one Trevor's mother had tried to take from me at that awful anniversary dinner. Held it in my palm for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I threw it as hard as I could into the ocean. Watched it arc through the air and disappear into gray water. Some things didn't need to be reclaimed or kept. Some things needed to be released. I walked back to my car lighter than I'd been in years. The future stretched out ahead of me, unknown but mine. No lies, no manipulation, no one controlling my choices or stealing my dreams. Just me, choosing my own path forward, one honest step at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.